Elizabeth Evans, and I'm a homeschooling mom of 4 young kids. I'm figuring this out as I go, but I'm here to talk to Bonnie, who has been writing and speaking on the subject for over a decade and has been homeschooling for 3 decades.
My name's Bonnie Landry. I've got 7 kids. They're ages 13 to 33. I've been homeschooling for 29 years. I'm a wife, a mom, a grandma. I'm a speaker and a writer, and I'm an advocate of joy. So we're here to provide this podcast so that homeschooling can look like you imagined it to be. Welcome back to the podcast, Make Joy Normal. Hi, Elizabeth. How are you doing?
Hi, great. How are you?
I'm very well. Yes. Lovely.
Good.
Looking forward to, I know we've got a boatload of questions this week, so I'm really looking forward to what you have pulled out of that. By the way, for all of you who are listening, Elizabeth is a wizard at pulling together questions and sort of organizing them thematically. And we've gotten a ton of questions this week. So I'm excited to hear what is up.
Right. And for those whose questions aren't answered this week, I have them for future episodes. So don't worry.
Don't panic.
Yeah, don't panic.
If you're really panicking, you can message me.
Right. Okay, so I figured that this would be a great time to start talking about planning for the year, especially as August is, 2 days away, a day away now? At the time we're recording.
Right.
I figured it was time to kind of maybe buckle down and talk a little bit more about resources for each subject.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
The first question I want to ask is, when you are planning for your year, do you choose resources and books for the whole year, or do you break it down, maybe 3 months at a time, or for now until Christmas, and then, plan for the rest of the year? What do you do?
Right. That's a great question. So I would say, depending on the topic and depending on the age of my kids, that would vary whether or not I chose something for the whole year or chose something sort of to do for a period of time. When my kids were younger, I certainly would break it down, especially if, say, for example, you have a 10-year-old who's going to wig out at an inch thick math book. Okay, I might break it down. Okay, for these 3 months, we're going to do this. Okay, so that they're not overwhelmed by the inch or inch and a half thick, what's the math program that everybody was
Saxon.
using when I first started? Sorry, Saxon math, right? Looking at that and going, no, I can't possibly do that. So I would break that down into smaller bite-sized chunks. So some kids don't have an issue with it,
right?
But some definitely do. So typically, I would choose something for the year. Say whatever we're doing for science might be for the year or for the semester. Okay. I'm just going to talk, let's narrow the focus a little bit. Okay. So let's sort of talk about kind of the kindergarten to grade 7 sort of elementary school years. Mm-hmm. Okay. Primary, elementary, because things definitely changed as my kids got older because they were really picking their own stuff. Sure. So let's talk about those years. It'll be easier. Okay. So there might be, for example, science, we often did together as a family in those years. So I would choose something, and it was more about, let's go through this book. Say I have a book on astronomy or a book I got, we used a lot, the World Book has a series called Young Scientist. Mm-hmm. So I would just pick out 2 or 3 of the Young Scientist books. Okay, well, let's do this one on geology, or let's do this one on space, mm-hmm. right? And however long that took. So usually maybe it was a month or 2. So I would definitely break that down into segments, but I'd have an idea of what I was going to also cover for that year. Right. Of course, being open to the segues that interest-led learning may take us, okay? Mm-hmm. So if they got super jazzed about planets and that's all I wanted to talk about, I'm going to obviously spend more time on that, okay? Okay. So other subjects depends, again, when my kids were younger, if I wanted to study the Middle Ages with them, I would basically exhaust it until they weren't interested anymore. So that might be the whole year. It might be just a few months. It might even be just a few weeks. Okay. But I would think, okay, I want to study this and, have them get jazzed about it. And if they weren't getting jazzed about it, then I would move on to whatever topic was the next one on my, little brain list of things I'd like to study.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so now I want to try, I know we'll go off on tangents, but I want to try and break it down by subject,
Good idea. Yeah.
just for organization's purposes.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the big ones we could start with is math. Now, you've talked about chocolate chip math. I've mentioned, and you've mentioned Saxon math. And then you've also talked about Life of Fred, which we actually purchased the first book of that.
Fun.
And before I finish the question, I have to say it is awesome.
Yeah.
I love it.
It's
And
fun, isn't it?
it is. And I like that it offers, it's not strictly math. There's like fun little things, like you can learn Latin roots. And I think one of the books even talks about like space, like constellations in the learning.
Yeah, and just the stories are funny and goofy and all that sort of go along with it. But I think Life of Fred does a really good job in making math a life skill as opposed to some subject you have to learn in order to, graduate eventually.
Right, right.
Yeah, I think it does a good job of that.
Well, how many times do you say or hear kids say, when am I ever going to use this?
Yeah. Oh,
And
yeah.
it's true. It's hard to figure out how you're going to use Pythagorean theorem in your everyday.
I was that kid saying, how am I ever going to use this? And then one of the first jobs I got when I was out of high school was selling carpet and drapery, right? Well,
Okay.
that's all math.
Yeah.
And it was, but suddenly it made sense,
Mhm.
because it had an application, right? So
Yeah.
no, I think Life of Fred does a really good job of that for sure.
And
And it's just fun.
I will say, so we got our Life of Fred book, and I was flipping through it, and there was a little bulletin or a bullet point, and I forget the context, but it was talking about a Latin word, and my brother already slammed me for mispronouncing it. I think it's umbra, which means shadow in Latin.
Right.
Well, my son and I, we just finished reading Peter and the Shadow Thieves, which is the second book in Peter and the Starcatchers, a series about the prequel to like how Peter Pan became Peter Pan.
Okay.
And the evil character in the book is named Lord Umbra. And the whole time I'm reading this, I'm thinking, this is a really dumb name for a villain. It doesn't sound that villainous.
Right.
And then here I find out that, well, he probably got the name from the root of, Latin for shadow. Because the book is about shadow thieves. It all made sense.
Okay. Yes. Amazing.
So anyway, let's circle back around to the question now that I've gone on a tangent. Do you have any other recommendations for math curriculum for
choosing math?
Yeah.
Well, I feel to some degree I'm a gross amateur and also an expert in math programs because we use several different math programs over the years. When we were first looking for math books, almost everybody we knew was using Saxon. There were other workbooks out there available. One was called Abeka, one was called the Plaid series because all the covers had some different kind of plaid on them. And I felt that Saxon was the most, probably the one that had the best reviews that most people use, they felt comfortable with. I found it, pretty boring, but it got the job done.
Right.
And I think it was a good, solid program, and it was cyclical. Most math programs are cyclical. That that it will, whatever modules you've already learned, it will revisit them every single time you do a chapter, right? It revisits the things you've already learned for the sake of remembering them.
Yeah.
So that's a kind of a good policy. So we used a lot of Saxon. I would say for the first 10 or 15 years of homeschooling, it's primarily Saxon. Then some other resources fell into our laps that would be, sort of more high school related. Jacob's Math, that was definitely a high school program. And then another series called Key 2. Now, when I used the Key 2 math, it was when I had a kid who was a bit wiggy about the big giant math textbook that they were going to have to use for the whole year, that was something that was off-putting or scary or kind of causing a problem. The nice part about Key 2 math, so it's Key 2 geometry, Key 2 fractions, Key 2 decimals, Key 2 whatever, I can't remember the different subjects that they cover. The nice part about them is there'll be, say, 6 or 7 booklets, and they're small, maybe a 1/4 inch thick at the most. and they're a workbook. You work in them. They're very interesting program, and they really delve deeply into the one subject area. Now they're not cyclical, so there would be supplementary in that way.
Okay.
If you were teaching your child long division, you'd want to make sure that you were sort of using something that would make sure you did a long division question or two every couple of days, so that you were remembering how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're struggling, okay, so here's a tip. Okay, I'm going to give you a big tip here. If your kid wigs out about a big book, a textbook, but you don't really know how to teach math, you can look at the textbook and see what they're teaching and just break it down, so that you're saying, okay, we're going to learn long addition. Okay, we're going to learn how to carry. Okay, don't move off of that until your kid has mastered it, right? Don't bother with carrying if your kid is totally out in left field and don't understand what's going on. Okay, but you can use things like Key 2 as a little simple focus on one particular area. And the nice thing about Key 2, it very much works on mastery. And, excuse me, you can do book 1. If they sail through book 1, you could buy book 2 and do that until they're challenged to the point where they can no longer do it. You could stick with, say Key 2 decimals until you've maxed them out on their ability, right? Sorry. And so that's a way of sort of breaking things down. So you have kids who are wigged out about the big textbook aren't thinking about it. Okay. You're the person saying, okay, let's work on this particular topic. And you know what topic to address with them because the textbook is telling you what to address next. Okay. So that's a really good way of not freaking out that you don't know what to do next, and the kid not freaking out because they have a giant textbook in front of them or a giant workbook, right?
Right. Yeah.
So that's one option. In the last few years, I would say 8 or 10 years, with my younger kids, we've used teaching textbooks. So teaching textbooks is a program that comes with a workbook, with a text. It's coil bound, so it's nice, it lays flat, it's easy to use. And it comes with a computer interface as well, so that you have somebody's teaching the lesson on a screen. Because I'm sort of screen averse, and because I just felt it was a time that I would like to spend with my child, it'd be better to break it down into 10 or 15 minutes and do it with them, so I know what they understand and don't understand. I just use the textbooks with them. Mostly, a couple of my kids played with the online lessons. Okay, so it's not live online, it's a recorded lesson. The guy is very good. My kids who liked that system appreciated the lessons. But I would say overall, most of the traction we gained was just sitting down and doing the textbook, sitting side by side with them while they, worked on whatever new concept was being presented. Again, a cyclical system, so that they're revisiting all the things they've learned up till now, every lesson or two. I felt that teaching textbooks was very clearly laid out, very well explained, really broke things down, and didn't assume that I knew anything. I found Saxon could assume that the student knew something, so they would introduce a concept without possibly going through a variation on a math problem, without sort of expressing, okay, here's a variation that you might experience, and here's some questions that have that variation. Saxon would tend to jump into the variation without giving some context, where teaching textbooks would say, here are some variations you might experience, and here's some practice to deal with that variation.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So I personally love teaching textbooks. I think it's a great course. And I took my kids right through algebra with teaching textbooks. So definitely great for primary. I think they start around grade 4. Definitely great for primary, for elementary school, and taking you right up to high school. I have never used Math UC, but I have heard some really, really good things about it.
Okay.
Especially for kids who are math averse, that it's a great program, and also takes you right up to high school.
Yeah.
So what about you? What have you used for your kids for math?
Just Saxon, and I'm excited about the Life of Fred because I've got my almost 6-year-old loves math. He looks at the grade 3 Saxon math workbook and he's like, yes, let's get this going.
Yeah.
My almost 9-year-old is like, nope, not doing it. I don't want to, he doesn't like fact sheets. He doesn't like worksheets.
Don't need this stuff.
Yeah. So we're probably going to get him in the Life of Fred because it's not worksheet based at all. It's, at the end of a chapter, you write down answers to questions, and that's that.
Yeah. Hey, okay. Reminding me of something, a homeschool pro tip. I had over the years, sometimes kids who were 2-3 years apart, one's a math person, one's not. And so there's this sort of, thing that can happen if you just put them in separate programs, like teaching textbooks for one, Life of Fred for one, teaching textbooks for one, Saxon for another. Then there's not that sort of like, oh, he's catching up to me, or, oh, I'm almost at his level, or it just sort of takes all of that sort of competition out of it, or worrying that you're not doing, your grade level or whatever. Right. So I think that's a really important thing for parents to know. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, especially because this past year, my soon to be 6-year-old started with 2nd grade math this year. This was his first year homeschooling, and he did great. And his brother was fine with it, except a couple times when they were doing the fact sheets, addition, subtraction, one would say, let's race. And the other was not cool with it. And so they see the brother writing answers and they're getting all upset. I said, I'm not racing.
Well, my 2 boys, they're 3 years apart, and one was a math person, one was not. And I remember the reason why it came to my brain that I needed to put them in separate programs was because I'd be doing math with the older one, and I would be saying, he could hear me, the younger one could hear me saying, okay, well, can you just do this and think of this, and this is, what do you think the answer would be? And the 3 years younger one would shout out the answer, and he would say, make him stop doing that.
Yep. Same problem.
Okay, I just have to take a commercial break. I usually drink wine while we're having we're videoing this, and this wine is so good. It's a Barbera from the Piedmont region in Italy. Barbera is a wine that is Barbera is a wine that is low tannin wine, so my husband can drink it. Because he can't have too much in the way of tannins. Okay. So I'm just going to do an infomercial for this wine because I have never had it before. It's so good. Okay. And I will put it in the show notes. Because why would we not do that?
Right.
Our poor parents, they need to know these things.
That's great. I was here sipping my protein shake because I just got back.
Every time I see you put that to your lips, I just think, oh, you poor girl. Why are you having protein shakes?
To build muscles.
Oh, right. Okay, right. Health. Okay, back to it. Where were we?
Okay, so do you have any other recommendations for math, or should we move on?
Yeah, I mean, certainly for high school, I would have some thoughts on math, but that's just sort of a very glossed overview of the kinds of programs that we used. Yeah. I think math is very much dependent on your kid, right? Sure. Yeah. And what kind of program is best suited for them. So, in a sense, like we have Saxon, we have teaching textbooks, we have, you collect things over the years, right? We had Life of Fred. And I would say that you need to be sensitive to what that child needs. Right. And what's going to be the best thing for them to explore. So it's kind of good in a way to get feedback from other parents on what worked and for what kind of personality or what kind of learner, so that, you may end up collecting more types of math programs than you ever imagined. Right. But that's kind of a good thing, right? To have those things you can rely on and not feel like, okay, we invested in Saxon and we must do Saxon. You know what I mean? Because for one kid, it just might not be the thing that's going to work. Right.
Yeah. And I think it's really great to recognize when, what works for one kid and doesn't work for another. It's okay to do different things, like you were saying.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would suggest to parents, if you have kids in primary, K-3, definitely look at our podcast on the chocolate chip math. I'll put that in the show notes as well, just so they don't have to try and sift through which podcast that was.
Yeah.
So that, because really that's a great way to get the foundation that you need to move on to something else more confidently.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And also to get a feel for what your learner needs. Right.
Right. Sure.
Yeah.
And then I think also when I was first starting, I was afraid to jump ship and go to something else.
Yeah.
And now, that I'm 2-3 years into this, I was really excited this year to plan. And my husband and we went to christianbooks.com because they have a lot of
Right.
homeschooling curriculums. And
Yeah.
we were looking through stuff and looking at what we had and just kind of putting together the year. And it was fun. And yeah, I could have.
It is fun. It's really fun, right? And so don't get stressed out. Now, this year, this doesn't really apply for this year, but let's assume this podcast is going to, be timeless. Okay.
Yeah.
That I think one of the worst mistakes that parents can make is going to a conference where there's vendors
Mm-hmm.
and feeling pressure to buy things because it all sounds so good. Okay.
Right.
First of all, I would say two things. One, absolutely support your vendors. If you go to a conference, support those vendors. Those vendors are the people who are sifting through all the material to bring it to you, reviewed and curated, and support them. Don't buy on Amazon if you're going to save a couple bucks. Buy from those vendors because they are the people bringing those reviews and curated materials to you.
Yeah.
So we want to keep those people going, right? And if it
Right.
costs you over the course of a year, if it got you $30 or $40 more to buy through those homeschool vendors, do it anyways, but don't feel pressured to buy at a conference. Okay. Mm-hmm. Take down their coupon code, take down their information, and sift through it. And this is the question you should be asking yourself: will this curriculum add to or detract from the quality of my life with my children?
Right.
Okay. And so you can really only effectively ask that question if you have time to reflect on it.
Right.
Okay. It's really important not to be, even if you had to pay a little bit more for it, don't impulse buy because it sounds so great. Support them, buy online, do what you need to do, but don't be pressured to buy at a conference unless it's something you've gone with, that is on your list already. But if you see something you think, oh, this, $300 curriculum that is going to cover 5 years just sounds perfect for my family. Mm-hmm. Think about it first and think about how it's going to affect the quality of your family time together. If you have any angst or stress about it, just don't.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's segue into history. My favorite.
Oh, me too.
Well, I mean, I think we've dabbled in history in previous podcasts, and we've talked about story of the world and what's the other one?
Story of Civilization?
Yes, Story of Civilization.
Okay.
Do you have any other recommendations?
Well, first of all, let me say this. Next week, we will be interviewing the author of Story of Civilization. I'm super excited. So it's the first time we've done an interview, but we can just grill him. Yeah. So I'm super excited about that. Yeah. His name is Philip Campbell, and you can find him at philipcampbell.net if you're interested in next week's podcast. That's what we'll be doing. In terms of a curriculum, I have never really used a set out curriculum for studying history. Okay. What I have done is looked at World Book articles. As you know, I'm a big fan of World Book Encyclopedia. Mm-hmm. If we want to study a particular era, I break out the World Book article. I look at the outline. At the end of every long article, there's an outline that breaks down what the whole article covered. And that's a great place to start for planning a historical study. Okay. Photocopy it, just check things off as you study them, So we've relied really heavily on our World Book encyclopedias to study history, and also the Eyewitness books put out by Dorling Kindersley are fantastic. They make, so for those of you not familiar, Eyewitness does a huge selection of books on both social studies and science. Okay, probably 100 books, maybe more. And some
Are
of
those
them will
those
be,
ones that when you flip through, they've got the main picture and then they break off into little
yeah, they're very visually attractive. I don't think I have one up here, so I can't show it. Very visually attractive. So if you go on Amazon or wherever you're buying books, or pop into your local bookstore and look at their Eyewitness books, all the Eyewitness books are kind of the same format. And
have one.
do you have one? Okay, that'd be great if you could
Let
show
me
it.
see.
Okay. So I'll just keep talking. The format is really visually appealing and really gets kids engaged. So basically any historical period you study, I've just been describing Eyewitness, sorry, I'll let you, I've just been describing Eyewitness books while you went to get your book.
Okay. I don't think this is an
But
Eyewitness, so it's Scholastic, but it might be similar.
Great Animal Search, no, different. These are totally different. These
Okay.
are great. We have several of these. The Great Animal Search, the Great History Search, the Great United States Search, whatever. There's tons of these books. Our kids loved those, but they're different. So Eyewitness are very visually attractive. So it'll say, for example, it'll have a spread on, say the book is on ancient Greece. So it'll have a 2-page spread of, weapons used during ancient Greek times, and then food, what kind of recreation, just a really lovely text to go along with any historical study. A great book for the sort of strewing method, or yes. So Elizabeth is holding on her phone with it's probably
Google.
Amazon you're on.
Google search.
Shark, space, farm, mummies. There's so many books that Eyewitness puts out, and I love them. We have a huge collection of them.
Okay.
And also almost every public library carries a huge selection of them as well.
Okay. Yeah. Well, this year we're doing, we have all of the Story of the World books, so we're doing the ancient history. And what I did is I looked up a bunch of nonfiction books to read along with my kids for each.
Nice.
So we're doing with ancient history, we're learning a little bit about China. So we're going to read the Silk Road. And I got a bunch of books from thriftbooks.com. If you've not heard of it, you can
Thrift is amazing.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh, I love them. But I bought a bunch of books that talk about the pyramids and King Tut. I'm not going to try pronouncing his full name.
Tutankhamun, as far as I know. Tutankhamun.
There you go. So
someone will correct me on that. I'm positive.
So that's kind of what we're doing as of now. But one of the questions from somebody, and I don't know her name, but it's basically what happens when you're studying and you kind of go off on a rabbit trail. How far do you take that before you circle back? Or do you just keep going and then, oh, hey, we're learning something new in history now?
Right. Okay. That's a really good question. Her name is Lori. Okay.
Okay. Hi, Lori.
I happen to remember the question. Yes. And so that would very much be another sort of it depends question, because I like rabbit trails if they have historical value, and I don't have a timeline in my brain that my kids, we must complete Middle Ages this year. Okay. So for example, if we were starting the Middle Ages and we started that with the fall of Rome, okay, so roughly we consider the Middle Ages to be to have started at the fall of Rome, okay? Right. If my kids got really hung up, they didn't know much about Rome, if they got really hung up on sort of the fall of Rome, I would want to spend some time on that, right? And even if it was to the detriment of delving more deeply into the Middle Ages, the fact that they're really jazzed about the fall of Rome and why Rome fell, it's an important question historically. And also they're interested now, so they're going to remember.
Mhm.
Right? So we have to always bear that in mind. So after, if they wanted to just discuss that for an afternoon, great. If they wanted to spend another week or so, okay, I'd like to know more about the fall of Rome. Like the Middle Ages isn't going to make sense to me until I understand more about Rome and why it fell.
Mhm.
So if they were really sort of pulling to do more, I would absolutely do more,
Okay.
so very much interest based. So that we kind of exhausted it before we moved on.
Right.
If for some reason I had a timetable in my brain, say for example, I needed, like we talked about last week, if I needed to submit,
Mhm.
um, you know, data, or I just even had a real bee in my bonnet that I must complete the Middle Ages this year,
Yeah.
that then I would maybe spend a week or two on it and then say, okay, let's go back to the Middle Ages now that we have a better understanding of the fall of Rome, and move forward, right?
Okay.
If
Yeah.
you're reading novels to your kids based in historical periods, it's a guarantee it's going to capture their interest, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're going to pull back for you.
Yeah. We that's actually a good segue, because read aloud is a very important part of homeschooling, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have a list of books that you choose to read aloud? Like I put a bunch in our cart to buy later this month, like is it the matchstick gun? um
Oh, I never heard of that.
uh
Okay, so I would say there are a few resources that I think are brilliant for helping you pick historical fiction to read to your kids if you're studying a particular era. Okay,
okay.
the number one resource in my world has been a book which is now out of print called Let the Authors Speak
Okay.
by Carolyn Hatcher. Okay, you can still get it, from used book sites.
Okay.
It is absolutely fantastic. She breaks down books by century. And so in her grouping of books, she doesn't say very much about the books. She tells about whether they're historical fiction or whether they're nonfiction. Most of them are historical fiction. She gives a 1 or 2 line description of them. She does, hundreds and hundreds of books. So she has to have sort of a fairly cryptic key to the books. But I
Hmm.
will tell you this, I have picked dozens, if not a couple of hundred of books out of her recommendations. I've had her book for years, and I have never had a bad book.
Okay.
Right? She was a homeschooling mom, just with years of experience, and the quality of books she chooses were just phenomenal. Okay,
Okay.
so in terms of choosing books from a historical area, there's a couple of other resources that are also excellent. One is a resource called Reading Your Way Through History, which is on a website called love2learn.net, LOVE number 2 learn.net. I'll put it in the show notes. .net, and they discuss a lot of historical fiction, but they have this great sort of timeline broken down for books you could read in certain historical periods, and also books of the Bible that would cross-reference to those books, stories from Greek mythology, or
Okay.
various aspects of history that would line up with a historical period. A really, really well done list. Shorter, definitely shorter than Let the Authors Speak, but also an invaluable resource. And what I have done over the years is just every few years I print off this book list from Reading Your Way Through History,
Mhm.
and I just put it in a duotang, and then I sort of have a checklist of books that I can add in. I also add movies to it. I've added movies over time
Okay.
to my list that they provide.
Okay.
Like right now, for example, next year we're looking, Lydia and I are going to start do ancient civilizations. And so I'm writing down some movies that would be appropriate. So one of them is the Russell Crowe movie, Noah.
Okay.
This is a
Yeah.
really interesting uh, movie.
Yeah.
And
It's
I
a
think it'd be
very
a great,
interesting take
it
on it.
is. Yeah, it really is. And I loved it, but it's got lots of artistic license.
Yeah.
But it's something that I'd like to watch with her when
Mhm.
we are studying ancient civilizations. I think it'd be really appropriate, in a couple of Egyptian movies. So, just
Yeah.
add those things into your list as
Can
well.
I learn along with Lydia, please?
Yeah, I think it'll be fun.
All right, I'll be
And
over.
yeah, I actually just bought Philip Campbell's book, Ancient Civilization. Sorry, the first volume of his program, Story of Civilization, just the text, and it's Ancient Civilizations. And I thought, okay, we'll just use this as sort of the spine of our study. So yeah, I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to cracking that open.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with Landscape with Dragons? That book?
Yes, I love that book.
Yeah, I
So
do too. My only thing is that I I don't share the opinion that dragons have to always be bad.
yes. So just for those listening, A Landscape with Dragons is a beautiful book on on choosing literature for your children by Michael O'Brien. And so it would cover historical fiction, but also a lot of fantasy literature and that sort of thing. That would be more, okay, what is it that makes literature appropriate or not appropriate for our children?
Mhm.
Okay. And so I think it's a good book for parents to read, a great book for a couple to read out loud together, actually, if,
Mhm.
if you're into that kind of thing, to just discuss the various chapters. Wouldn't that book make a great masterclass?
It would. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's think about that. Um, and so I think that tools for discernment are something that parents should always be equipping themselves with
Yeah.
on all levels. What is appropriate, what is good, what is beautiful, what is true for my children.
Mhm.
So that would definitely be one to add to your list of tools for discernment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of my critiques, apart from dragons having to be bad, is I have a hard time. He gives a bunch of book recommendations at the end for,
Mm-hmm.
little babies all the way up through adults.
Yeah.
But at least here in Michigan, our libraries are, gosh, it feels like most of those books aren't available.
Yeah.
Um, so
So
that's
I
frustrating.
think, yeah, I think most homeschoolers recognize the value of books, and the reason why we would want to invest in them.
Mhm.
And of course, the library is a great way to supplement our growing homeschool libraries, because for every year that we homeschool, our library tends to grow.
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, here's a couple of thoughts on that, just as a tangent. One, if people are looking, like grandparents, whatever, looking for gifts to get your kids, give them book lists.
Mhm.
Right?
That's a great
These are some
idea.
real, yeah, these are some books I'd love for my kids. Can't afford them, but I'd love them. Also, when you think about buying purchased curriculum, consider the opportunity cost that you may be giving up on developing your own family library. If you're spending hundreds of dollars, maybe $1,000 a year on curriculum, consider how you might build your library,
Mhm.
uh, as part of the opportunity cost of, how you spend your money. Right?
Right.
I think that's an important thing to do, and budget, to be able to build your
Right.
library.
And I would
Yeah.
also say, don't be afraid to buy used.
Oh
There
gosh,
are
yeah.
definitely those books that are, prized books that you do want new. I get that.
Yeah.
But there are other ones that are just great to have. Like Blueberries for Sal is a great book. We have a
Oh
really
yeah.
tattered paper one that's still readable, but
Yeah.
there are other books that, we have really nice. And
Hmm.
so,
And I'll tell you something, as you get older, you know, the in most cases, as you get older, kids get older, kids start leaving home and all of that, the financial burdens of the early years are lessened, right?
mhm,
And so when our kids started become young adults, when they started having their own kids, we started building their library for them. I told my kids, right off the bat when they started having kids, hey, listen, I'm going to not be the toy grandma. I will be the book grandma,
oh
just so
my
you
gosh,
know.
that's the greatest.
I know. And so, but mostly what I've built so far, that books that we've given them, are books that we really loved and they really loved as children.
Yeah,
And I want them to have those books for their own kids.
yeah,
And so, and we, of course, we've given them some of ours ones. I'd way rather see them using them than, them sitting on our shelves.
right,
I want to have books to read to my grandchildren, but I don't need 3 bookshelves full of children's books either. They just
yeah,
won't get used.
right.
Um, but I think that it's a really lovely gift idea as your kids get older to give them a copy that they can take of their favorite books that they can take when they leave home.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
My mother-in-law has given us quite a lot of books from their collection, which has been
Oh,
just wonderful.
so
I think
nice.
in one of our episodes, I mentioned I love Elsa Beskow books. And so this past Christmas, my mother-in-law gifted our sons with a couple of
Oh,
those, which I was so grateful for. And we've read them and
yeah.
just love them. And so it really is, and I mean, my kids are generally always excited to get books. But I know some kids may not seem excited to get books for birthdays or
Yeah.
Christmas, but that appreciation comes,
It grows. It grows. Yeah.
a day later, if,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. Another, just back to the sort of resources for homeschool, for choosing historical fiction. There's one other really amazing resource, and that is Bethlehem Books.
Okay.
And if you go on Bethlehem Books website, it has their books categorized into era,
Okay.
right? And so that's a really great place. And we've never had a bad Bethlehem book. They're fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. We're about out of time, but there are definitely more questions. So maybe we should do a part 2.
Yeah, I
here.
think maybe. So next week
Yeah.
we'll be interviewing
Right.
Philip, but let's do one more question. How about
Okay.
that?
All
Okay.
right. So how do you distinguish between vocabulary and grammar? And what curriculum would you suggest for either of those, or singular?
Right. Okay. So I have, this will be a short answer because I have no suggestions to make at all,
Okay.
because we've only ever used dictation
Right.
for grammar, for vocabulary, for all of the language arts up until independent writing.
Okay.
And so I would really recommend people go back, even if your kids are older, go back and listen to the dictation podcast episode that we did, because I just think it is the most efficient, effective way of understanding language, because you are both looking at language in its very technical form, putting it under a microscope and sort of analyzing language when you do dictation, but you're also stepping back and looking at it with a telescope and looking at the beauty and the wonder and the purpose of language. So
Okay.
I just can't say enough about dictation as a tool.
Right.
So yeah, I don't actually have any recommendations because that's
Okay.
been such a successful thing in our life.
Okay. So we are definitely using dictation this year. But because vocabulary and grammar are not strong suits for me, we
Right.
have chosen to supplement with something called First Language Lessons for the Well-Trained Mind. It's by Jessie Wise.
Right. Okay.
So I can't give my opinion on it because we have yet to use it, but that is what we are going for. So those parents who don't feel strong enough in just sticking with solely dictation at this point, there are resources out there. Maybe if anybody who's listening has suggestions and want to comment on Facebook or Instagram.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
And also the one book I got when Lydia was maybe 10 or something was just because she really loves grammar and learning all the grammar rules, was a book by Usborne called Usborne Grammar and Punctuation, I think.
Okay.
And it's a fantastic little book. If you're not comfortable, just have it sitting beside you. You're doing dictation, either working through it with your child or just using it as your own supplement while you do dictation, right? Because it does take time to kind of learn the skills that you need. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you already, the thing is, you already inherently know it because you can speak properly, right? So you inherently know it, but sometimes articulating what is going on in language is an important part of the program.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
all right.
We will definitely do a part 2 because I wanted to know
There's
more
so much
about
more.
Dictation and all of that. So stay tuned, everyone.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, after we interview Philip, that'd be great. Okay. So God bless, and we'll talk soon.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.